It's right up there.
All right. Do we need
Yeah. Through the chair, we have a new clerk of the week. This week it's Kara. You have the names for roll call?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I call the roll.
Yes.
Yes, I definitely need that. Okay. Okay, yes.
Working.
Belly? Here. Okay. Hoppy?
Here.
Lennox? Loftus?
Yes.
Lozano? Here. Villarolo?
Way.
I know.
That was beautiful.
All right. Can I get a motion to approve tonight's agenda? All right. Motion by Kimberly, seconded by Dave. All in favor? All right. Motion carries. And minutes?
We actually have called to audience because I forgot to rearrange your agenda. So technically, we have an audience member.
Okay. Would our audience member like to make any comments this evening? Not required, but if you have any public comment, you're welcome to do so.
Normally it does, but I published it wrong.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't have it.
Okay. No comments from the audience present. So
If we want to do public comment, we should make a motion to move public comment after the regular agenda. Then we could have the opportunity. Otherwise, we missed our opportunity.
okay.
After the regular agenda.
Change the okay.
I have a motion to move the comment to the end of the agenda.
Excellent. Motion by Dave, seconded by Brooke. All in favor? All right. Motion carries.
Now we're getting creative. All right.
Do minutes?
Now it's approval of the minutes and we're done.
All right. And I need a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Motioned by Dale,
Second.
seconded by Dave. All in favor? All right. Motion carries.
Here we go.
Good evening, everybody. So like the last meeting, we have quite a bit of content for you tonight. Joe's going to go through the program-based budgeting approach that the city uses and help introduce the concept of trade-offs. So as we start thinking through possible recommendations and scenarios, we are going to get a sense of kind of mandatory services versus discretionary services, what kind of choices you have to make, and kind of what your options are as you proceed. So today we'll set the table. We'll continue the conversation at next week's meeting as well. But what I wanted to do for our colleague connection, oh, it's not on? Yes, it's on. Turning it on and off. That's my IT expertise. Great. Now I think it may be working. Welcome, Simrit. Yeah, thank you. Glad to have you join us. What I wanted to do as our icebreaker today is just get a sense of from you all, kind of like Goldilocks, about the level of information that you have received thus far and how you're feeling about it. And please be honest, there is no right or wrong answer to this, but we're just trying to get a sense of, given the information that we've given you thus far, is it too much detail? Is it too little detail, or are we kind of hitting the sweet spot in terms of your level of comfort with the information you've received thus far? And that will help us to tailor kind of the level of detail that we give you going forward. And so certainly we understand that not everything is going to be the same. You know, there may be topics that you'd like more detail on or less detail on, but just trying to get kind of a pulse check of the group to understand if you're feeling really overwhelmed, or if you're really comfortable and you're like, no, I can take more, you can give me more. So we'll start with Kyle, we'll go around this way and end with you, Quinn.
I think thus far it's been very good. I really appreciate the summaries, especially we've been getting, and then the look aheads, getting all the information. So all the links, all the resources that have been provided, I think it's been appropriate thus far. And then I think going forward, we're just going to have, I think, more questions. I think it's going to, the more information we need, I think, is going to be more driven by us asking for more. So I think at this point, it's been good thus far, and going forward, just as needed. So.
I agree with Kyle that it's been fun.
As long as I do my homework, I feel okay. But it's a lot to digest. So I have to go home and read all over again. But it's all good.
I agree with the Goldilocks zone. I think we've gotten a lot of good information. I think there's great opportunity to ask questions and look for more. Your summaries have been great as well. I think as we get into the scenario planning, I think there's going to be a lot. Hopefully, in my mind, I hope I can ask more questions than I have thus far and be able to contribute in that way as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of where the money is needed, what the current state of everything is, it makes sense in terms of scenario planning. I think that's where my head's probably going to explode, because it even seems like from the email you sent, just looking at different cities, the way things are proposed, the message behind it, that could have a huge impact. And yeah, scenario planning is probably where my head is going to explode.
I saw scanners and that would be really, really cool, but I hope your head does not explode. I think I love all the information. I'm kind of a geek for all the city stuff, and it's been really interesting to get these fine details, and I don't think you should be leaving anything out. So I think great.
I admit I need to catch up on what was happening last week, but I rely a lot on my own personal municipal finance understanding, and I continue to dive deeper based on a class that I took recently. But the more you share, the better I will be able to explain what it is we're doing to our neighbors and to field questions that are, asked, and that's really my goal as well, because I want to be a bridge in the community on this. Thank you.
I agree. I think the amount of information, it's been a lot, but it's supposed to have been a lot because this is a lot, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot that we need to understand. I also think that, so I've gone back through everything and like highlighted and annotated and written things down, and I've noticed that there's a lot of, well, not a lot of, but there's some overlap between things, and there's some repetition in like, what's presented, in some of the language from week to week. And I think that that's a good thing because it helps it really sink in. And so I think that that's something I'd like to, continue doing in some of the presentation materials that we receive. I also think, and maybe this is something that we're planning for, December, January or something, and I'm just not aware of it yet, but I think it would be good for us to have sort of like a level set as a committee and make sure like we are all on the same page and understanding these things in the same way. 'Cause it's sort of like we get the information in these sessions and then we sort of like take it back, digest it, reread it and things like that. And so that would be good to have like a sort of a level set session. And again, maybe that's something that was already planned, but just something to consider.
Yeah, I think this has all been really good. I think there's an appropriate level of depth. I think that there's, I certainly appreciate all of the folks from the city, your willingness to answer all of the crazy questions that we have and being really willing to engage in that.
All right. Well, since you gave us permission, now we're going to give you lots of information. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe. He's going to help orient us, and he has his own.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right. And he will be sending out the presentation after the meeting.
I don't know if anyone has watched the videos so far, but speaking in the mic is working. It's very helpful on the YouTube. You can definitely hear the difference, but when you're not speaking in the mic, so just mindful moment. Okay. You did give us permission, and I will preface tonight in saying that this was a lot of information for me to take in, and this was a lot of information for me to puzzle through. And I actually collaborated with one of the CEOs of the software company, Program-Based Budgeting, or PBBI. They just got acquired, actually, so now they're part of Tyler Technologies, which is a really big government technology platform. But he's assured me that he's going to remain our contact, and actually I'll say before we dive into this, this is another scratch the surface moment, but he has committed to drive up here and support the committee if the committee would like to do some live scenario planning within the software, which I'm not capable of doing, but since he designed the software, he would be really good at that. So it surprised me, so he's now on my top 5 contractor list.
Don't ask him what number.
So tonight, I want to get into priority-based budgeting, and we're just going to start with a real quick zoom out. What is it? And how is it different than traditional line item budgeting, which you see in most governments? I sent in the homework this week, and Dale, I laughed because please do let me know if you find the term homework annoying or assaulting. I thought you were throwing shade.
Oh, no, not at all.
So part of that homework was, one, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of the kind of industry standards that the government is affiliated with. So in this case, the ICMA, which is my professional affiliation, and that's any city manager is affiliated with them. I'm going through a credentialing process with them right now, but they're the professional standard for city management. The National League of Cities is the standard for policy development. They're based out of Washington, D.C., and they are an advocacy group nationally for cities, villages, and townships across all 50 states. And they represent that group interest in Washington, D.C. for legislation. Very influential in giving input in the design of ARPA and the CARES Act. So National League of Cities is there directly with them. And then you have GFOA, which is more Phil's world. But that's the Government Financial Officers Association. And so that's any CFO at the municipal level is affiliated with them. And they really focus on thinking about best-in-class standards for auditing, best-in-class standards for accounting, and budget management. And so they've shifted their philosophy, really looking at local governments, and they've shifted away from traditional line item budgeting, and they're starting to focus on priority-based budgeting, which is budgeting for outcomes. So I gave you a copy of the sheet. City Council has 8 outcome areas. We just call it critical success factors, the things that must go well in order for us to be successful in our vision for the city. So these are the areas that we should really focus on. And when we're making budgetary decisions, when we're making capital investments or department investments, we want to focus on these 8 outcome areas. And if we're investing sums of money that aren't helping us improve these outcome areas, then that's a red flag. And so that's just kind of the first foundational basis of this. Looking at a line item budget, I am going to give you a copy of these in a moment, but I have a little quiz up front, and this has the answer in it. So you'll get a copy in a second. This is hard to read a little bit. So really, this slide is looking at how looking at spending and a line item budget might look. So in the very top, it says, what do you spend? So we're looking at postage in this case. In a line item budget, you're just going to see the word postage. It's going to be affiliated with an account number. And then you're going to see in a water department, there's $500,000. Parks Department has $100,000. The finance department has another $100,000. So that the line item budget tells you that these departments spend postage. You don't really know at the bottom, what are the items? What are the individual costs? We don't know. We just know postage, and then you can assume postage is affiliated with mailing probably, and you got to make some assumptions. When you enrich that with programs, you begin to fill in those question marks. So now on the bottom, we know that the water department, that $500,000, about $400,000 of that is mailing for bills. So when you look at the program as a whole, and you begin to look at the activities and the items that make up that figure, now you can have action points, decision-making action points. So do we completely get rid of mailing and require digital print? Now that's going to offset costs. That's also going to raise equity questions. It's going to raise accessibility questions, right? And so I don't know what the right answer is there, but the point is you can't have that discussion without this rich information. And postage is just a really basic, easy, understandable example of that. So that is the difference between line item budgeting. So now we see a little bit more, and I think this slide will make a little bit more sense, hopefully by the end of the night. This is from the company, and that's too many words, so I'm going to skip this. This is really their language, and I'll allow him to come back and revisit this. So for our audience, it's our 8 critical success factors, the things that must go well in order for us to realize our vision, are economic prosperity. We have a safe, protected, and engaged community. So that's a statement of investing in communications, investing in a robust department, having a presence in media, and having, of course, a robust public safety presence. Supported infrastructure, accessible transportation, strong regional partnership. Both of those are values oriented. So we care about accessibility. So with accessible transportation, we can also extract that maybe accessibility is an important value set for the city. So that goes back to that posted question. That would force us to ask, is going to all digital to save the money, is that really going to be aligned with our outcomes? And that's just a discussion point. Strong regional partnerships, and that's an opportunity that says we are open for business to work and collaborate with our neighbors. So is there an opportunity to bolster our mutual aid contracts with public safety and see if we can harden those for certain services beyond just emergency response? That's an opportunity. And the fact that we covet regionalism says we should have those conversations and we should seek them out. Organizational and financial excellence, that's an internal measure. That's an internal outcome. So that speaks to governance and professional standards. Those are the things that aren't going to impact the citizen directly, but it will indirectly by your hiring standards, by your equity standards, and by your professional development standards. Healthy, connected, invested neighborhoods, and of course, climate adaptation and resiliency. This current council actually added that outcome area in 2020 to the city council strategic plan.
Are there key performance indicators associated with how is achievement of these recognized or recorded?
The KPIs actually, that's still an opportunity for us to evolve our strategic plan. We are not there yet. Most of our KPIs are affiliated with the master land use plan and or council initiative associated with each outcome area. We have some very basic key performance areas. Our audit, our audit is very objective and the standards are very clear and they're driven from the top down by the state and the industry standards. So that's an easy KPI. Where it's a little bit less, you're looking at healthy, connected, invested neighborhoods. A KPI could be an actual park investment metric, but that's really going to be dependent on the budget, dependent on the liquidity and the cash flow available. So those are the things that we do have to harden a little bit. So instead we focus on the Parks and Rec Master Plan, and we look at what the initiatives are and our progress on ticking those down. So for example, one of those Parks and Rec Master Plan initiatives is improving the accessibility of all of our sidewalks and our park playground equipment. We can measure that because we've made substantial accessibility efforts to connect all playground equipment to parking lots and other modal accessible areas. I don't have the statistic, but I know we do monitor that, and our Parks and Rec department would have that number. And that's an example of the KPI. So one theme to just think about before we really jump into this, and you're going to see this kind of through this exercise. Someone mentioned the word interdependencies last week's meeting. That really stuck with me because programs are all interdependent, and that is what is going to be clear to you, what is not so clear with the line item budget. So typically in the past, a traditional way to approach budget adjustments with a line item budget would be to make, a flat out 50% across the board cut in budgets. What does that even mean? That just means that's just a number and you're giving departments less resources to work with, but you don't really understand what implications that has across all departments, across all programs that are interdependent. And programs at the government level are interdependent by design. because governments do operate in a scarce resource environment. Unlike the private sector, we can't increase revenues. We're subject to the revenues that we have. So we can create and cultivate the environment for an attractive commercial and residential property tax base. And making sure that we have a positive environment for that is about all we can control. Other than that, the revenues, as we've looked at, are really fixed and predetermined for us. Property tax revenue, state revenue sharing, all of those things are formulaic and not in our control, unlike the private sector. So by design, we have to do a good job of making sure when we have a position and we have a program that they are resilient, meaning they're not a silo. You don't hire one person to do one program. You have shared position, shared programs, shared functionality, where one position can benefit multiple programs and competencies. And two, priorities must be aligned with outcomes. That's a fundamental to us. It's fundamental to our governance value. So we do scrutinize that every year during the budget process. We question that, and the softwares help us build those.
Joe,
Yeah.
could we have an example of that?
Example of
The interdependencies, how one
Coming up.
department works with another.
Here's-
Specific.
yes, and I'm about to go into that with my game. So the big step back here, if you look at that dashboard that we showed you last week, there's 206 total programs that are registered in the city of Ferndale, and that's across all revenues, general fund and all of our special revenues. So far, we've just talked about the general fund, but the reality is the city government of Ferndale's budget with your water department, with your parking department, your general fund, roads, is about $60 million. So that's when we think about people, we can't just be limited to the general fund. We think about $60 million of programs. Those programs, the water department has to continue, right? So when you think about public works people, you think about all programs that they affect, including your major and local roads, your engineering. 175 of those programs are directly affiliated with the general fund, so that's a robust general fund program suite. We're going to go through the top 15 programs by expense in a moment, and just those 15 programs eat up 50% of the general fund budget. But before we go into that, we're going to have this exercise. So what do you think this $308,000 gets you? I'll read this in case you're struggling reading the machine. So on the left, this is a line item budget approach. You have the account number, the sequence 101, that is a code for what fund it is. In that case, 101 means general fund. The 202s are your major roads, and 203 is your local road. The next sequence of numbers is your department. 441 represents the DPW. 478s are various smaller agencies within the special revenue fund for major roads. So it's all coded. Next, we see the expense type. To simplify it, we just said, is it personnel, is it people, or not people? In the description here, we have one grade 1 laborer, a grade 2, and a grade 3 laborer. With each grade up, you have more experience. You might have a better operator. So someone who's a grade 3 might have a licensed by the state to operate heavy machinery, where a grade 1 doesn't have that license. So that's an example of the distinction between the classes. You have your DPW director. You have a DDA lead for the DPW. You have a DPW supervisor and a crew lead. And on the non-personnel side, we have some repair and maintenance activity. You have equipment rental. You have additional repair and maintenance activity and additional equipment rental. So it looks redundant, but both of those non-personnel charges are charged to two different funds. So any guesses what this $308,000 represents for Ferndale as a program? What's that? This is for an annual. Yep. This is the cost of this program in a fiscal year.
So program meaning it's a longer term thing, not like a single one-off project that DPW did.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm going to guess Click It, Fix It.
What's that?
The Click It, Fix It app where they're filling potholes and or repairing sidewalks or something?
It is not the app, but the app is used for this. It's a part of it. It is, cost $308,000 across 3 different funds to plow our streets between December and February, for the most part. It's
a light winter.
This is a typical program year. So if it's a light winter, I'd have the DPW director adjust that. But I mean, it's by and large, the labor's going to be used. They're probably just going to be patching up potholes earlier, or they'll be doing some work on the salt barn. They'll be doing other winter maintenance activity. In that case, you just change the money up to general fund and take it off the major and local roads, because the major and local roads, those are funds that we receive money from the state via the gas tax called Act 51. That's all collected at the state level through sales tax, and then they owe all cities, villages, and townships a piece of that. And so this is, our piece goes towards construction and or maintenance of those roads. Maintenance includes snow plowing. So you can't do it all, but you can do a piece of it. And that's formulaic.
So, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
So for snow removal, why are there why is there a DDA lead on there? Like what role do they play in snow removal?
In the DDA lead, that would be the DPW person assigned to be responsible for the DDA programming. So the DDA contracts with the DPW, and that contract includes snow removal of the parking lots within the DDA district and within the street. And
Okay,
so they
it's
would be
not someone from the DDA.
Correct.
Okay,
It's the DPW employee assigned to the DDA lead in this case. That contract, I think, has 1 more year on it. Yeah, now we can have enough audience too. Six. Watch those staples. They were pretty bad for the first 5. Good? Yeah. That's for the fiscal 24 budget. So that's just a good example. The way we think about this now is, and this is all examples tonight, no one's suggesting anything. But in this case, if you cut the DPW budget by 10%, we have to understand what that means in terms of the program. So that's not just a laborer's salary. If I lose a laborer, can I still deliver the service? In this one program. Now they have many programs, which we can look at. We'll circle back with when we look at the public-facing dashboard. So the software allows us to view programs in many different ways, and we're going to define those ways. I talked about before this, the general fund budget in fiscal 24 the council adopted is $26 million. We looked at that last week, so we know that they adopted a $26 million budget. And we know that 70% of that budget is personnel. So viewing programs by expense, remembering that number, 26 million, 50% of your programs by expense are taken up by these first 15 programs. Your most costly one is patrol operations. EMS, district court magistrate, as I said, and the key thing to remember there, the district court is the judicial branch of government. They're independent of the city. In this case, the city is the executive and legislative branch. So they are separate, just as they would be on the federal level. Our only relationship with them is on the budget side. Council approves the budget. But their staffing structure, their contracts, their operations, their judicial mission, that is not our business. So we don't really have that. But they are still subject in the general fund. So, and that's through the state law, state structure. So the lower district court is a function of the general fund. And we'll talk about that in a minute because that is a factor. Your public works, your building infrastructure, and so on and so forth. I won't read them line on line, but you finish with IT help desk services, and that is the smallest expense there, and that's $410,000. That is an interdependent program because it serves every single department and every program that uses technology, whether it's the facility we're in or the mobile technology we're using, and the support for that. The focus, the interdependency focus here that jumps out at me as the city manager is I look at patrol operations. And if you make an adjustment at patrol, you're going to affect the district court magistrate because the district court's docket is based on the activity of the police department and the crime and incidents within the jurisdiction. So if there were fewer, ideally there's less crime, but taking that out as variable, that's nothing I can control. If you had fewer people patrolling and issuing citations and managing that, then that's going to dictate the traffic you have to the court. As we've established, the court is not subject to city oversight. So if the court doesn't break even, the general fund ultimately will subsidize that operation. So that's an interdependency. You have police-related activity who are responsible for regulating laws within the city. If there's fewer laws being regulated, that's less activity in the court, and that's a problem. Not of our design, designed with the state law. So you also have probably impact on investigations because you have less police officers, and if you have less police officers, you're probably pulling detectives off of investigations, probably putting them more on the street to patrol because you have fewer officers. So that's going to affect the chief's operations. I'm not saying he would do that. I'm just saying that is an example of the interdependencies where he's going to have to readjust his operations and his department design based on the number of employees he has. And of course, officer and department training, that is in the top 15. And if you reduce your police budget by a flat percentage, you're probably going to reduce your training, which is against our outcomes because we invest in safe and engaged community, and that also is defined by developing our officers, and we have high expectations of their education requirements. The next table, we just build a little bit on this. So this is going to be an incremental presentation. We're just going to build on every table a little bit per each section. So here, and this shows you the benefit of the software. Now I see in the table those same 15 programs, but I've added some more information. I can see the cost, but now I can also see the number of full-time employee equivalents that are associated with each program. And then we threw in the personnel and non-personnel. We also threw in the revenue, because some programs generate revenues too. So when you make adjustment or cut decisions, you've got to take into consideration all these components. And so patrol operations, we have about 26.15 full-time equivalent officers that rotate various different shifts. Each shift would be a platoon. With those personnel, you have some non-personnel costs that are associated with them. That could be their technology, that could be their radios, that could be the cybersecurity licensing that supports their body cameras and their in-car dash cams, right? So there's a personnel and non-personnel personnel cost with all these programs. And when you click in the department, you learn a little bit about all those resources that go into the program. And then, of course, the revenues. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. Then you have the revenues. And on the revenue side, the patrol operation, the tickets they write, we don't collect the revenues. Once we write the ticket, we have no part of it. It's the court's domain at that point. So the revenue is actually assigned to the court in that case. So that's why the district court magistrate program, assume that magistrate program just represents the district court. So that's the revenues for that specific program. Their judicial disbursements resulted in the budget was for $642,000 in citations. Quinn? Correct. Correct. And then. Yeah, and oftentimes, revenue brought back is pooled for the general fund. So some programs that don't have restricted revenues are considered more pooled. Property tax revenues are a good example of that. That is actually brought in by the finance department, but Phil doesn't get to keep all the property taxes in his budget. That's dispersed throughout the departments. Phil left, sorry. Sneaky. Yeah. We want to keep 50% of our budget.
Sorry, Joe, can you go back over the 60,000 in revenue and patrol operations? You said that goes back to the magistrate?
That is actually separate. So I'd have to look down in the software, but those revenues could be liquor license revenues associated. So the state requires us to collect a fee for liquor license revenues. We inspect, we certify, and when businesses inspect and certify, the state collects a revenue from the business for a liquor license, and then we get reimbursed for our time. And so that $60,000 could be that. So that's a smaller program revenue. And then EMS, $485,000, that's an example of the medical reimbursement. So we do have a company that helps us do medical collections. That is subsidizing or restoring us for our costs for actually coming out there. It's the cost for our people, it's the cost for our equipment, and it's the cost to take you to Beaumont usually. And then if there's any other costs affiliated with that process, we have a company that collects for that, and that's $485,000 collected by the company. So here we layered on one more layer of data set. Now we've added on our classifications, and we're going to define these in a moment. But the program really the software classifies the programs in areas. Is it a mandate? Is it mandated by the federal government to do this? Is it mandated by the state government to do this? Is it a reliance factor? Meaning, are we reliant on the government to provide the service, or can the private market provide an alternative equivalent service? Private market can't do patrol. So the reliance is 100% on the government to do that. So that informs us when we make our cut decisions. Recovery costs. That is, I think, self-explanatory. And then demand, of course. Demand is just based on year-over-year activity and trends. So the assumption would be if the trend stays pretty flat, then it's a flat demand. If there's a lot more money going by council in a year-over-year basis, that would be a higher increased demand or a lower demand. So that's really, and we'll define that in a moment. And then population served, which we defined in a moment too. So basically, is this a service that benefits all of Ferndale, a majority of Ferndale, less than 10% of Ferndale? And these are all different ways of looking at programs and making decisions on budget adjustments when you're looking at a downward adjustment. And then all of that, through a weighted average that we're going to talk about in a minute, gets you over to your right column. And that's really your final score. And we interpolate the score with our capital planning. So when we make capital decisions, we want to know, how does that capital equipment serve these programs? And then there's a weight assigned to that capital project. And that helps us prioritize. As we've established, only 5% of our general fund budget is spent on capital. And only 0.5% of our budget is spent on our facilities maintenance. So this scoring kind of helps us make those decisions and prioritize.
Struggling to figure out the relationship between the numbers in the columns and the final score.
Yeah, we're gonna go through that in a minute. We're gonna break that down. Quinn, I think you were asking about net. You were alluding to net, the revenues. Do we consider for the revenues? So in this slide, here you have that. So the top 15 programs cost 13.7. If you consider the revenues, the net is 10.6. The I think the lesson here is to understand by design, again, government, we subsidize by design. We don't break even, we don't provide a profit. We provide services because of the reliance. Because the private market isn't going to provide equivalent fire and EMS services. It's not going to provide equivalent policing services, and so on and so forth for the same cost and same service level, which means that that's why the government exists, to provide those services. So here we just showed a little introduction to it. And first, I'll just say, does anyone want to take a break? Because this is a soup, and I understand that. It's okay? We're okay?
We'll maybe need a break.
Yeah. This is a smaller section, but this is just an introduction. So we talked about score and the scoring. So what does that mean? If you flip, you have the what we call program attributes. So how the scoring works within the software, you have the mandate category. So if it's state or federal mandated, it's worth 4 points. And if it's self-mandated or by ordinance, it's worth 2 points. So half of the federal. That's still a local. That's important. And if there's no mandate, if it's a program we're not mandated to do, but it might align with our strategic plan, it doesn't get any points because it's not mandated, right? And so then, because mandates are important and oftentimes out of our control, that's going to get the greatest weighted average. So when they pool all the scores together, that's weighted at a 2. Does that make sense? Next over, we look at just demand. And that's when we look at investment. Is it increasing? Is it flat? Or is it decreasing? That could be subject to council policy. It could be subject to the community's needs at that time. It could be subject to many things. So that is rated a 1 because we want to be responsive to the things that are being asked for. But it is subject to change and it's not mandated. Recovery cost also, it's only weighted a 1 because not every program is designed to recover its revenues 100%. But can it recover any amount of revenues to offset cost? That is still important. So since that's important, it's 4 points for yes or 0 for no. It's really that simple. Yes or no, does it generate revenues? Population served. We're interested in, is the majority of the population benefiting less than 50% or less than 10%? That's really the way it's fragmented. And so you see there's various scores. So if it's a program that benefits the majority of the population, we want to consider that before we cut it. If it's a program that's, aligned with our strategic plan, but the reality is that you look at the population and it's really benefiting a segment, 10%. In times of lean times, that might be something you look at. And then finally, reliance. Is there an alternative provider that we might be able to find at a more competitive price on the private side? And will the population accept that, the community? So if so, that's 4. And then if not, that's just a 0 because it's not an alternative. All of these things aren't better or worse. It's just approaching it this way gives you a different way to view the decision making. And what we often say, budget adjustments aren't really, this changes the conversation about what to cut, and you're looking about what to keep. Because what you keep should be aligned with your core community outcomes, and it should benefit the majority, and it should speak to all these things. Does this make sense to everybody? So this is the structure of the software. It's the basis of program-based budgeting, filtered up to our priorities.
I just have a question.
Sure.
Besides these, how does 2 make sense? Besides, like,
Most of it's objective. I mean, it's objective by definition. Federal state mandates, that's certainly objective. Demand is objective because it's based on the actual activity happening and based on the policy.
well, the reason I asked is they all say 4. Right? Every single thing is 4.
In those top 15 programs, you'll also notice they're almost all public safety programs where you're not going to have a private market alternative. So that's, in that case, those are all 4, but that is not the case in all programs. Now, we have 207 programs, I think so that was just the top 15. But we do know that those top 15, if you cut them away, The other 195 make up the next 50%. So that speaks volumes. That, again, we talk about in the budget last week, public safety takes up about 60% of the general fund budget. We know why, right? It's an expensive thing to provide. So once you get past public safety, then you have a lot more of the government programs to look at. Not all of them are for Reliance. So if we look at top 15 programs by score, utilities is the only one that gets 100. So there you can see the cost with our utilities. So this is all of our DTE electric bill for our street lights, our facility lights, and all of our other energy associated with DTE or consumers energy for the cities. Not sure if you're aware, we did in 2019, I think, council approved a big capital project to upgrade all poles with DTE to LED. So all of your street lights in the city are LED. That was about a $400,000 project. At the time, DTE estimated a 3-year return on investment. The year after we did that project, they changed the municipal rates for LED lighting. So I can say that our annual budget there has flatlined. It stopped increasing like it was. So it is having an effect, but I don't know that it had the return on investment within the 3 years that DTE had indicated, unfortunately. So utilities, we have to have them. Property tax administration, that's also a mandated service we have to have. Auditing and reporting and so on and so forth, you get down, and in the top 15 by program, the lowest score you have is 83, and that's conduct elections. So elections is still a mandated service. I'd have to look at the score. I don't have the matrix right now, but that is something when my partner comes up from the company, he said he's willing to drill down into that live with you guys if you want to just dig deep into certain programs or departments.
Joe, I still have a question about how the score is calculated. I understand the numbering system. I understand the weighting. How are you getting from this to a score out of 100? Is it just a multiplier to make that number out of 100?
I don't have that answer for you, but I will get that for you. That'll be added to my homework. I'll ask again, do we want to take a break now before we go into scenario planning through the lens of program score categories? So that was our introduction to scores. Feel good? Okay, we'll plow through. I'm going to open this can and we'll keep talking.
We're literally opening.
Okay, so looking at it through the mandate lens, and now here's some examples when we look at all cost centers, so all programs or as organized by department. We see at the bottom level here, I apologize for the small writing. It's just a lot of information, unfortunately. So on the small writing, you can see all the state and federal mandated. So when we're talking about budget cuts, we're not really talking about those programs. You drill up and you look at self-mandated and then no mandate. So looking at those no mandates, we're going to look over to the right, and those are examples of programs and affiliated costs with those programs. So we have had in the past a GIS tech that does our GIS administration. That is mapping out our water infrastructure, our street infrastructure, plotting out precinct ballots, absentee voter maps for elected candidates, all kinds of things. Basically administering all data and all maps. That program was established in 2017. They also work and coordinate with Oakland County for our asset management plan. So they track all of our utility light poles as well, and then they manage all the data points in that. So that actually is a position that's right now frozen. It's vacant and frozen right now. But in this example, that would be a budget cut decision. So that's a position or a function you could either just drop, you could outsource and possibly reduce your level of service internally and rely on other companies to manage that data and you just update it less frequently, and you have less utility on the data and mapping side of things. The city clerk. Clerk professional development, it's not required. It's required by me that all directors in their performance plan have professional development, but that's not a state mandate, that's my governance mandate. So that mandate at a time we could have to change that and say, you're not going to get your municipal certified clerk credential, which for me, it aligns with our outcomes of competencies around organizational financial excellence. So that's why I require it of all directors. Dog park, we built one, but we don't have to manage it. So I don't mean that to be crass. We can just open it up, have it go unmanaged, and that'll be what that'll be. But that is like the counties. You see that function level at the county dog parks, if you see county dog parks. And that's a bigger organization. In that case, they probably have a maintenance budget, and they have a schedule where they come back and check on it. That's an example of what we're talking about. Level of service is what we're talking about. Customer service at the Parks and Recreation, communications and outreach. Residential composting, our community loves it. That's an example of a self-mandate. We don't have to provide that. We've chosen to provide that. That's consistent with council's strategic plan. It's consistent with our waste management plan that we adopted by council in 2020. That's why we have it. But we don't have to have that. Public relations on the policing side. Council, as part of the 21st Century Policing Task Force model by President Obama that we've adopted, said community policing is a priority. That's the new model we're aligned with, and we have a community engagement officer. You might know her, Jill Molmeister. She's out in the streets. Before that, it was Sergeant Baron Brown. We don't have to do that. That's a self-mandate. So in this, that could be a decision point, in which case you abandon the role and you just put the officer back out on the street, and we don't do the community engagement. Youth sports and youth enrichment, it's not required. It's discretionary. So when you look at programs through the mandate level, that's a very black or white level. Is it a mandate? If not, that's how you can make decisions. If we're just focusing around doing the things that are mandated and then making decisions based on things that aren't mandated. Does that make sense?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, are there any revenues associated with this? Because I imagine, like, for the dog park, like, don't you have to pay for that and, like, have a tag and everything? So it's not just,
Robert?
like, a $7,000 cost.
Oh, Robert, you gotta. Oh, sorry. We're rolling.
Yeah, so there's a resident and non-resident membership fees. That fee is yearly. Every year you have to renew your membership, and so that goes to the maintenance of the dog park, as well as the system, that key fob system. And so there's also a training course that the residents have to go through before they can become a dog park member.
So I guess my question behind the question is, yeah, because this is just showing the cost.
No, this is not net. This is just looking at whether a program is mandated or not. And this is just the lens you're looking at it, just straight mandate. If we were looking at revenues, we'd be looking at recovery. Does it ever?
So here you have total cost, though. So that's just cost. That's not adjusted for any revenue that the dog park brings.
That's correct.
Is there any view that we can look at to look at the net, like elsewhere in the slide deck?
Yeah, we're gonna. My exercise here is to go through all the lenses, the different ways of looking at programs. So this is just the first one, mandate. We're going to go through each of them.
Okay.
To the revenue question, though, all parks programs, most of them have revenues that come back in, right?
Yeah, for example, youth sports program will generate some revenue with registration fees. Those fees go towards, let's say, uniforms, officials, like parks maintenance, the lining of the fields, things like that. So we do that sports budget, we build all that in, and at the end of the season, there may be a little bit of revenue. Sometimes it may be cost neutral. Sometimes there's a little revenue that we do accrue. So
Joe, I have kind of a more high level question, which is when these programs are developed and the budgets are put into place, how does council know, how does the public know that these are reasonable costs for each particular program and not, somebody just said, oh, well, I need $20,000 for this thing, and because it's not line itemed, no one's going to know that I, put in some extra money. So how does council and what are the checks and balances in that?
Well, council, the budget they adopt is line items, so you can actually look by line by department, and you can actually see those costs. And there's also a purchasing costs. We have a charter-driven policy that actually requires us to go for approvals for council for any purchasing above $2,500 in value. So when we're bringing a purchase request about a program, you would see that brought to council, and that's your opportunity for the check and balance to ask questions on those contracts, those major capital purchases. And every position that is filled is also filled publicly on an agenda. And so throughout the year, all those things aggregate in the April budget process. So when it's April, we look back at everything that we brought to council, it's rolled up into that budget. Looking at population, again, so population served, if you look at this lens is really going to get you to look at the governance programs. Every governance program is going to affect less than 10% of the population. So city manager staff development, any budget for leadership development or professional development that directly benefits less than 10%. I would argue it indirectly benefits the population. Your strategic plan, project management for city council strategic priorities. That is project planning, right? So that's less than 10% of your population. So these are all really governance programs. And again, looking at the lens though, when you look at budget cuts based on mandate, it's black and white, and based on population served, you're probably going to lose any internal facing service. That's your finance department, your communications department, largely your city hall, pretty much. Oh, I didn't even look at it. As a matter of fact, all those departments are referenced here, including the city clerk. But that's clerk's professional development. They're 0 for 2. It looks like I got to defund that. Then through the reliance lens. So these are the things that we could find potential private competitive alternatives for. Payroll processing. So employee recruiting. Could we reduce human resources staff and outsource recruitment? Could we automate recruitment? And would you get like-for-like service? So that's really what Reliance is saying. You can't just say, is it a private sector alternative, but you have to go one deeper. Is it a private sector alternative that can deliver an equivalent or better service for a lower cost? We certainly don't want to trade one good for one bad. And then looking at the net costs. So these are scenario planning through net loss revenue recovery lens. And so here you're looking at, it's a yes or no answer, right? So when you look at the no's in the software, it's going to give you a list. And in the list here we have public relations, you have adult sports, really adult enrichment, parks and recreation services. We have the GIS service again. Our media relations, so what Karen and I do with the media on a weekly basis, all of those things, they don't bring in money or enough money to break even. So those are just activities that either a government requires itself to do or that a government is required to do. And that number in the far right column, that's the net. You can assume that that's adjusted for all the revenues brought in by the program and the expenses. And through demand, here's where we look at, have we had an increase in previous budgets, a flat, has it been pretty flat, or have we had a decrease? And so when this part of the program is plugged in, it's going to pay attention to the decrease in budgets. And those decreases are rich in context. So there are a lot of reasons that a program might increase or decrease. So this is more subjective and one I don't find as much value in. And the program, which we'll do when Eric from the software company comes, we can mix and match these things. And so you can do scenario planning based on these different targets. You could see what happens if you intersect mandate with cost recovery. And then when you do that, it's going to give you some recommendations based on that. Now I think we will take a break because we're going to go into scenario planning by department. Why don't we take 5? And then before we start back in, I think I'd like to pause for any dialogue on what we just heard, the software. Let me tell the IT to take 5. kind of the centralized arbiter, so all the departments report up to us. So that does remove some of the bias. Not saying that our departments have bias, but most departments, they're the subject matter experts in their departments. The city manager is the jack of all trades. We are the ones with the global vision, looking at tying all the different department activity together and making sure that's filtered up and speaks to all of our strategic outcomes and city council priorities. Excuse me one second, I got something in my eye. All right, so scenario planning for costing positions. I want to just preface this for everyone watching, 3 things. These are not suggestions by any means. These are just purely illustrations. And this section is going to show you the costed difference in departments. So not every department position costs the same, and this is going to illustrate that. All of the assumptions are based on pooled average salary by department. This is not actually, if I had to make tough decisions, this is not how I would do it because I have various union contracts. As we've said, we've established I have 80% of my labor is union, 20% is non-union. So when I look at making cost-cutting decisions, I'm looking at the collective bargaining agreements and I'm going to look there. But for illustrative purposes, the pooled average salary by department, that's going to take every single person who's identified under the police department from your records clerk to your police chief. And it's just going to do an average. And it's really, that is not precise. That is just illustrative, right? So, and then finally, of those costs, we're assuming fully burdened cost. And what I mean by fully burdened, that is their salary, their medical, and any other fringe benefits they have if they have a defined contribution match. Make sense? Okay. So this is just a brief breakdown of our personnel. You have your full-time employees broken down by department. If I have a star by a department, that star means that a special revenue fund outside of the general fund contributes to a position. For example, the Public Works Department, many Public Works employees' costs are defrayed to the Water Department, which gets revenues from water services, water bills, water fund for water-related activity. We have auditing standards that we're held to, and actually on an annual basis, we're provided the proof hours worked associated with water. And then that's really how they verify the charge-offs. So in the DPW, you have water. You have the sanitation fund, which gets revenues from the sanitation millage and sanitation fees on industrial, commercial, and residential properties. And you have your major and local roads. We kind of talked about that earlier. Those revenues come from the state Act 51 gas tax. So that's our contribution to that. Other departments are like the finance department. The finance department has a water billing clerk. The water bill revenues pay for the water billing clerk salary. So that salary is represented in that number on the right. But ultimately, you deduct their salary from that number, and that's the general fund burden. The city manager has the zero waste manager position assigned to it. That again, that's because climate resiliency is a city council strategic priority. We want to show that climate is a commitment for the city of Ferndale, so we actually realigned that. It was formerly in the economic development department, but we shifted that into the city manager's department because we wanted to show and demonstrate that it's a long-term commitment to climate resilience as a principle for the city. So the sanitation fund actually pays for a zero waste manager who focuses on our zero waste streams, and our predecessor is the one who actually designed and implemented our compost pilot that we're currently expanding. Human Resources Department, we actually have a retiree specialist who's funded by our pension systems. We have 2 closed systems governed by 2 different boards. One's a police and fire system, and one is general employee system. Both of those pension systems have eligible costs. One is management of pensioners. And so we actually developed this position within the last few years. Emmanuel's fantastic, and he's done a great service for our retirees. So the pension system subsidizes that. And then City Communications has a part-time position that's funded through the Public Act 51, Public Act 51, through the publicity tax that we talked about last week when we looked at our millages. And that's the one that's, it can only raise $50,000 a year net from the entire community. So it charges about $2 per property, and that's filtered up for communications related purposes, and that's a state law that allows that. If you look down, you have the 70-30 split, and that's how you can see the general fund. As I said, the budget's about $26 million that was adopted. 17 million, if you round up 18 million, is personnel. The remainder is non-personnel. So we're going to go. I feel like I just lost this. Is this on? Okay. So we're going to go kind of by department just to illustrate again. The big takeaway here is the difference is personnel positions are not one for one. So when you're looking at a $4 million reduction in our revenues from rolling off the millage, that's the number we're trying to get. And I am rounding there. It's about 3.7, but for simplicity purposes, I'm just going to round to 4. And so of that 4 million, police positional cuts, if you got down to 27, so that'd be about 15 cuts, that would save us about $2.1 million. That looks at the average burden cost of that would be about $141,000 annually. Some savings might be offset by increased overtime because we've reduced staffing numbers. Would require service level changes. Below that, you see, and I won't read these, this is really small text, but this is also illustrative purposes. When you make those kind of programmatic or kind of staffing level adjustments, it's going to impact programs, right? It's not just a line item, it's going to impact the program. So these are the programs you're looking to probably impact. You're looking at training, you're looking at patrol, administration, possibly a change to the chief captain structure, the command structure, and so on and so forth. And then we go back to the interdependencies. So if these are adjusted, how is that going to impact our judicial court budget? How's that going to impact our other outcomes if we're adopting an outcome-oriented process, right? How are you getting back to that third critical success factor of public safety and communications? On the city manager's office, we have 4 employees. One of them is funded through the sanitation, which means we have 3 general fund employees. That is the city manager, assistant city manager, and the special events director. So you just pull out the fully burdened cost. The average is 102. That would be one position cut. And then you look at the potential programs that are impacted by that or other areas that you could cut based on that. So again, you're looking at your governance. You're looking at your project management, your professional development budget, your staff development, recruiting budget, and so on. Human resources, we really only have we have 2 employees that are general fund burdened employees. So this would be just a cut of 1 for that department. Netting it out, just savings of about $135,000. You would have you could make adjustments to legal services, which is our labor attorney. The labor attorney helps us with collective bargaining agreements, negotiations, and any labor grievance processes. And then you have the health and wellness clinic that actually add risks and costs. And I'm actually going to have Justin, are you comfortable just giving an elevator overview of what that is?
So our clinic is for employees only. We actually have 3 other cities that are with us, Hazel Park, and then it's Oak Park and Royal Oak. It's an employee-run clinic. We hired the doctors, we have the nurse, and we work out of Madison Heights City Hall basement. So one of the benefits of it is that we have a dedicated doctor and nurse on staff certain days of the week, certain times, and any employee that's any full-time employee in the city is able to go online, make an appointment, go see the doctor, get generic medications filled at this office, and is gone within 30 minutes. Okay, so it's not a tax on our health insurance, and it's free for the employee to go and get prescriptions filled, have maintenance done with any issues that they have as far as their health is concerned. And we also use that opportunity for the clinic to come here, and we call it an AHA event, which is a health assessment, where an employee comes, gets a blood draw from the nurse, and talks to the doctor after the results come back, and they get to know kind of where they're at as far as their health is concerned. It saves us money in the long run when it comes to our health benefits, and it's more personal. It's more personal for the employee to be able just to go to the doctor that they have there, and not have to wait in the doctor's office for a half hour to see the doctor or just see the nurse. And it's all one-stop shopping, and it's been utilized extremely well by our city and the surrounding communities that are involved as well.
Which communities did you say utilize it?
It's Madison Heights, Royal Oak, and Oak Park. I'm sorry, I said Hazel Park, but it's Oak Park, Royal Oak, and Madison Heights, and us. Yeah, they give us an annual report as far as utilization and things along those lines.
Workforce health risk indicators.
Nope. We don't know obviously personal information, but we know how many people in the city are dealing with what ailments, right? And that really helps us kind of deal with our health benefits in a different way when we know we can focus on.
Producing health outcomes, that clearly allows us to have a more productive workforce, is taking less sick time and drawing on less medical benefits. So
So do each of the communities then pay like a prorated rate? Like
They do. We share money, depending on utilization of the health center. But yeah, everybody kind of contributes their amount or their fair share. A lot of the work that was done to build this up was done by different departments in each of the cities. So Madison Heights gave us their basement and an office. Our DPW hung the sign. So like there's a lot of collaboration as far as getting that up and running and then keeping it going.
yeah, that was a pretty cool innovation by my predecessor in the preceding HR department to actually establish that. They were one of the first communities, and I think several other communities nationwide have started looking at that model, really with the focus of reducing workforce illness and making more productive workforce with the service really focused on patient outcomes at the municipal level. So that is a program. Ferndale could walk out of that contract, but then you also have consequences of that potentially in terms of workforce health and wellness. For the fire department, we have, I believe, 26 firefighters. So looking at positional cuts, this is just an average aggregate. It's $173,000 annually that could be reduced. The five would accumulate, or sum up to $865,000. So between the police and fire, you've made up just about 2.8 million of the 4 million. But with substantial program impacts.
I guess, sorry, through the chair. One question just generally with this. So each one of these, when you're doing your situational budgeting, could be offset by increased overtime. So you're going through and doing your budget and say, okay, we cut 865. We then go in and also do an analysis. Is offset, we can project.
Correct. Yeah, we have not gone through that as in-depth exercise, but ultimately you would look at your call run averages over, let's say, a 3-year period. In this case, with the fire chief, I would ask her to scenario plan what it looks like to staff with X fewer firefighters, and then we could project based on the call run data what the overtime demand would be. Then that new cost would offset to some degree some of the upfront. So again, yeah, this is just illustrative purposes. This is not all the way.
That's just like in general, I guess, when you're doing your budget exercise. Look at, based on these weights, it makes sense to make a cut. Take like the most likely one.
Then here's a caveat.
Take it and look at what the offset costs. So it's not just.
Yeah, I mean, it would be an iterative process, right? The first crack, I get some feedback, and then we'd go, if the cost reduction was offset by cost increases because of overtime, then we have to begin drilling down more, and we'll probably not want to exacerbate either of those departments anymore, so we'll have to start looking elsewhere. The Community and Economic Development Department has, I think, 8 fully burdened employees assigned to it. This department is self-funded. It's one of our self-funded department that is really reactive to the environment demand. So that's your building permits, your inspections, your licensing, and your code enforcement. All those services do generate revenues through the citation process and through the actual licensing process. This is also the warehouse for our cut of state marijuana licensing revenues, which is about $300,000. So the CED department oversees the licensing and regulations and inspections of those businesses that are registered with those state licensing. And then as such, that department receives the revenue, but ultimately they get paid. Anything beyond break even is distributed to the general fund. Looking at Parks and Rec staff, they have 4 full-time positions, a position cut of 2, just netting out average compensation of $79,900 for fully burdened. Then you look at the full breadth of programs, and this is really, these are your discretionary and your self-mandated programs. And the communications department has 2, so really with just one position cut, you're looking at about $95,000 average fully burdened. And that is all of the range of programs from marketing, promotions. They're an internal service and external service department, so they touch everything, your newsletter program, your social media management and presence there. And this is just kind of this just kind of summarizes and wraps up why do we do program-based budgeting. It's really, we want to better understand what we do, how much it costs, and is it organized within our outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And that's the end of this presentation. So I guess, we'll go back into kind of dialogue and discussion. One of the biggest points here that I'm making is, and if you go back to my budget presentation, which I can bring this back up, if you closed all of City Hall, when we looked at the general fund budget, if you closed all of City Hall, that would save the city $2.9 million. So we just blew away this building and everything associated with it. You still won't have your $4 million. And so that just, when we look at trying to recap that $4 million, it's a tricky situation because employees aren't one for one and facilities aren't one for one and their capital budgets aren't one for one. So the public safety side makes up 60% of our budget for a reason. And so when you're looking to try to catch up on $4 million, that is going to be, it's just where you find the most money to get back the $4 million. Then we have capital deferments. We've talked about that, the good money after bad scenario. That's those chickens are going to come roost eventually. We can defer capital, but eventually the pipe is going to need to be replaced. And then the flooding damage is going to have to be paid for. So that was just an introduction into the kind of scenario planning. Hopefully you guys see the different lenses. So if we're asked to, if I'm looking at a budget where I'm cutting $4 million, this is how I'm going to be looking at it. I'm not going to be looking at it by a line item, 20% across the board, guys, give me your cuts. That's not it, because I have one cut is going to make an impact on another area. And so we will take our time with it. We will scenario plan. And questions?
Questions of understanding. Is there anything that you want to ask to make sure that you understand the information presented tonight? Yeah, David. Yep.
I brought up the Reliance code. And they're, like I said, the top 15 of them, they're all. That comes into play when we start.
For sure.
Right? And core means it's provided provided by the city and there's no other option.
Right.
So I'm just curious, like if I look at, talked before about like emergency medicine, that is something that other communities have outsourced. How does that come into?
On the EMS side, yes,
I'm just using that
as an example, yeah, with EMS, there's a private ambulance. That's still going to be a different service than a fully licensed fire department. It's going to be a more restricted service. So it's not like for like, but that is an alternative. It's a service level change. And so EMS is a good example of a private market where we're talking about regionalism and we're talking about, in this case, trying to partner with another agency. Let's just say Madison Heights, for example. Should we regionalize and establish a fire authority with Madison Heights? That is something that would require the willingness of the community and city councils of Ferndale and of Madison Heights. It also requires the willingness of the collective bargaining units to agree on which collective bargaining contract they like better, or they would have to, in this case, both fire contracts would have to say, let's abandon it and renegotiate and combine. The problem often with we're looking at that is the differences in which cities offer defined pension, defined contribution. If a city has defined benefit, they're not going to want to give that up in the contract. And so that's going to be ultimately a barrier for negotiating a consolidation, if you will.
But so when four is in there, it doesn't mean that a possibility. It just means that right now that's what.
It means, well, objectively, it means there's not a private market equivalent. The private ambulance, the fire chief could certainly speak more about the medical field than I can, but it's an example, but I wouldn't say it's not an equivalent, but it's an alternative. Yeah.
Just to keep with that same example for consistency. So if that were something that was to be cut and privatized, is that then something that residents would expect to see as like a fee? Like it would still have to be paid for somehow, correct?
Yeah.
It might not be part of the general fund budget anymore, but would residents then be paying a fee for that?
Your bill from the ambulance company would be, that wouldn't be subject to our fee schedule. That would be the fees negotiated with the ambulance company. So if you called and the private picked you up, you're going to be just subject. You or your insurance provider are going to be subject to their fee schedule and whatever the fees are that they have, because they would have negotiated contracts with the hospital system. So really, all of that is just on them, and we just wouldn't have a role to play there. And in that case, we respond to fires, and we're a fire department. Again, all illustrative. These are just examples. Yep. For anyone
We're all
watching.
friends here.
Yeah.
We're all on the same team. Yes.
If that were in the system, put it as 2, for example. That mean that we rely
I think what I'm going to do is, this is more of a software systems question and a design question. So I'm going to actually clip this video and I'm going to send it to them and I'm going to ask them to give an explanation. And then, as I said, they offered to be here, but I certainly don't want to speak on their behalf about their design. I'm speaking to it as I understand it, but they're the designers and they would certainly drill down better than I will.
I wonder if the question, sorry, Dale, I know you have a question, but I wonder if the question too, at more of a global scale, is about how on a regular basis is the city staff and the city manager and the city council looking for ways to do things differently to save money? No?
I think we asked about that last
Yeah, right.
But I think
Yeah, more time.
Yeah.
quite the answer yet. I didn't want
I have a homework list. Yeah.
didn't want to ask
Yeah.
you yet.
Yeah, but I do think, is that what you're getting at? Yeah. Yeah, because there's probably, I don't know, you said there's 207 lines. So there's all these programs and it's hard for us, y'all eat, sleep, and breathe it, I believe.
Yeah.
So somebody must know which of these are options to do differently and how much money could be saved. But it's hard looking at a sheet to know that answer. Okay, Dale, we'll let you have a turn. Sorry.
I have stage fright. Through the chair, what is the amount, the dollar amount, I always forget, and I don't know if you have an exact amount, of the Headley revenue that we get now? 3.7 million.
Yeah, it's going to change every year, right, based on all the elements we talked about. But as of this adopted budget, it was 3.7. While we talk, I have the budget presentation, so for resources, I'll put it up.
Great, thank you. Other questions of understanding?
So, Joe, a lot of the things that we looked at yesterday, or looked at earlier in these lines, that could be cut. A thing that came up over and over again was continuing education for staff. Can you talk a little bit about how cuts to continuing education and some of the other line items in here might affect our ability to retain current employees and or bring in qualified new applicants?
Yeah. To be frank, Ferndale, as we've said, we always can't compete dollar for dollar with other bigger cities. Royal Oak is our neighbor. So where we do try to compete is aligned professional development. And that is a core competency I require of all my executives. So if you're a director or you're a deputy equivalent, you're required to give yourself a professional development path. And you're going to tell me how that is going to speak to your personal development, and it has to align back with the organization. It has to benefit the organization in return. So if that were to be cut, I would imagine it's going to be a retention issue for us because there is a supply and demand is cattywampus in civil service, not just in public safety, but in public works, in city government, city hall. There's a lot of competition for talent out there. And so if we scale back those other smaller things that we can invest in, you're probably going to see a little bit of a talent drain, I would imagine.
And then I guess a follow-up to that is, so there are cuts, we lose some staff, maybe we lose some staff because we can't financially support that headcount anymore. And then someday in the future, additional funding becomes available. What does it take to restart programs that have been mothballed, to bring back positions? Is that like a quick process? Is that like a multi-year, you have to build up again and it takes a while to see those services return?
It's a multi-year process. I mean, think about yourself. Just look at your own personal experience. And when you're looking for jobs and you see a company that is kind of up and down, not consistent, its mission changes every 3 to 5 years, is that a company you want to apply for? Or are you looking for a more reliable company with a heartbeat mission and a track record of consistent investment and a track record of consistent workforce values? You just have to ask yourself that. And so you can actually look as close to the 2008-9 recession. Really, you started seeing organizational restructure at the city level by 2012. And then through 2012 to 2016-17, you start seeing the changes take place. So we lost a significant amount of staff reductions in that year, and you changed service levels. At that time, an efficiency effort, actually, our police went to 12-hour shifts, which was something that was negotiated, but it ultimately had to be done because they lost a substantial amount of staffing levels. So they lost their traditional daily shifts, platoon shifts, and now they work 12-hour shifts, so it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and they have a different work schedule because of that. So that's where the restructure started happening, really at the public safety level in after 2008-9. But then you started seeing the city hall again. You had older, I want to choose my words carefully. You just had the organizational structure was designed for a different time. And so that modernization, that restructure, you launched a communications department for the first time. You launched an IT department or agency for the first time. You started building in, you got your first human resources department by 2015 that the city had. So really you started to see a stronger professional centralized service. That happened over 4 to 5 years, and that was with a consistent city council policy that was driving that directive. I hope that answers your question.
Would you like, I don't hear any more questions of understanding. Would you like to set the table for our next meeting? And we focused a lot on expenses today. I believe the next meeting we're going to talk about what are some of the revenue choices there are.
Yeah, well, I have two paths we could go. We're going to get to millage alternatives, and I'm in the process of studying that and providing a menu of alternatives and non-alternatives. I think this is really the exercise of how we would approach no millage. And so that's the bottom line. If there's no millage, this is how I'm going to be evaluating decisions with council, because this is a city council budget. It's just the city manager is accountable for recommending it and administering it. So it's a collaboration between me and council. This is how I will be walking through it, and it will be an iterative process. So we can invite my friend from Cleveland who offered to come up here and do a deeper dive, and we can do a deeper dive and do direct scenario planning. And he can certainly answer more specific questions. We can do that. And then I could get to millage. I can also go right into millage alternatives and start introducing options to consider, because there is the Headley override, and that's really what we've talked about, but there are other options as well. And I think I heard that there was an ask about what other options might exist. And so I can start introducing those, and I've already contacted the city's finance attorney, who is our expert in most of these millages, or in this case, finance law, because if we finance a facility, we're going to have to issue bonds, and then he could tell you all the rules about how you adopt a ballot measure to issue a bond to build something.
All right, who would prefer to have the friend from Cleveland, the contractor, the favorite, come up and look at the expenses in more?
Friend from Cleveland is
A Tyler employee. Yes, yeah. It's not just like his buddy from college.
Tyler Technologies.
Yes, yeah. Who would like to have him come up and walk through some scenarios in terms of budget cuts and expenses as the next topic? Okay. Who would prefer to move to scenarios in terms of the revenue side? It's fairly evenly split. So the good news is we can do both. So why don't we invite your friend up, and if we could salvage some of the time, not maybe spend the whole meeting, and at least introduce, maybe not get all the way to the revenue, but at least introduce those concepts. Does that make sense? Will that work?
Yes, some of these dates are subject to their availability. So the first thing I'll do, we're looking at, when I look backward from our meetings, opportunities that we have left in the year, we're done after December 14th for the year. So we have the 12-14 meeting, the week before that, and then 11:30 and 11:16.
You say he has to come here all the way. I mean, they have an office here.
They were just acquired, and he is the CEO and founder of this company, which is Resource X. Tyler just bought Resource. So that was a Monday news release. But he lives in Cleveland, and he is from Detroit. So his family lives in Berkeley, actually. So yeah.
I was just thinking to myself, there's probably more availability if they have someone in my office that knows this program.
Tyler doesn't. Yeah, they probably don't know it yet. But for the attorney and him, I'll have to kind of see when their availability is. But really, we have Thursdays between now and December 14th with the Thanksgiving break.
Anything else? I think that's all we have for the agenda.
All right. Well, then I will open it up for public comment if we have any comments from the public.
Yeah, sad.
Okay.
Sad that I've missed the window to be on the committee, but I'll be here every week going through this. As a citizen that just moved here, my taxes are insane, and so I want to really be part of all this going on here. So you will see me here every week to have lots of questions and hopefully have some input. So love the city, love everything about it, but just want to be more involved.
Thanks for coming out. All right.
It's a great way to start.
So we do have homework listed on your agendas. What we wanted to do, Joe and I were talking about the question, I can't remember, I think Brooke, it was you who raised it about how are we going to communicate with the community. And Joe and I were reflecting on that conversation. And we thought about how important it is to bring the community along on our journey rather than at the end saying, here's the recommendation. Don't you agree with us? So what we were suggesting, and certainly this is for your feedback, but is that you begin having some conversations now with your neighbors, with your friends, with people just, you know, you get to know maybe in the supermarket, on the street, at the dog park, wherever it is you're talking to people who live in Ferndale, who vote in Ferndale, and share a little bit about what you've learned and surface questions and concerns. You know, what are they interested in? What beliefs or myths maybe do they have? And bring those back, and that will be part of how we open the next meeting is what have you learned? And what can we add to the pool of knowledge as we think about maybe what questions we have and what we want to look into as a group, and also maybe how we might be thinking about talking about kind of the arc of our work together and the ultimate outcome, whatever that. Sound good?
All right. Any other comments, questions, concerns from anybody before we close out? We may not have. I think I got sidetracked by something.
Oh, really? Good job, clerk.
All right. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? All right. Motion by Alvita. Seconded by Dave. All in favor? All right. Motion carries. Anything else? All right. Hearing none, I will take a motion to adjourn. All right. Motion by Brooke. I heard a second by Alvita. All in favor? All right, and we are adjourned at 7:55 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.